kind of a primitive holder. Piece of angle iron. And I cut a curve in it, put a couple holes in it. I can put it in the vise. And I can put the differential on this. I mounted it, and notice how I put the ring gear on this side rather than on this side. If it's on this side, there's more weight out here, more leverage, puts more stress on the flange. I don't think this flange would break, but why take any chances? So what we need to check on this is the preload, which is how much effort it takes for this to turn. And it's not the initial torque that it takes to move it. It's after it gets moving that you want to register. Okay, before I do anything, I'm going to test the preload on this. This is an inch-pound. It's a 24mm socket on the nut. And it looks like it's right around 2 pounds. No more than that anyway. Getting this indentation, or whatever you call it, where it's knocked into the slot in the shaft so that the nut can't turn. Trying to get that out is a pain. I don't know, if somebody comes up with an easy way of doing it, please post it in the comments. I usually just take a cold chisel. This one I'll probably have to grind to suit, and then I grind it so I can get underneath it and knock it free, or at least, you know, pry it out so I can get the nut off. See where I knocked that free, that notch. I used this cold chisel. I ground down to that shape. Well, it looks like I found another use for that bar. I can support the differential with it, and what I'm going to do is loosen that nut, but I want to find out what torque it's set at ahead of time. And another thing I'd like to mention is on this chisel for clearing out that notch. When you're grinding a cold chisel, make sure you have some water nearby. Dip it in regularly. If it ever turns blue when you're grinding, the metal turns blue, that means you lost your temper in that spot. You don't want that to happen. So I took my torque wrench. So anyway, I moved the nut. And when it just barely started to move, then I started setting this. And I pretty much determined that it was set right around 64 pounds, maybe 65 pounds, which is actually below what they recommend in the book. The book is starts at 69 to 144. But anyway, when I go to put it back together, I'll line up this notch again when it's right around the 64 pound mark, and I should be in the exact same spot. But just to be sure, I'm going to take this nut off, and I'm going to count the exact revolutions it takes to get it off. I counted the revolutions. It was 9 1/4 turns. You know, the nut can only go on with the one way. When it catches, that's the only way it can go. So it catches right about there. It takes me 9. It'll take me 9 1/4 revolutions to get it back to normal, to where it was. Another thing I might mention is, with this nut being off, there's nothing to stop this whole differential from just falling to the floor. So there's usually enough tension to hold it there, but just be aware of that. When you take this nut all the way off, make sure you're prepared to catch this thing if it drops. I'm going to get it off by taking a brass mallet. I'm going to tap this while I'm holding the differential down here, so when it breaks free, I won't have that differential fall into the floor. Alright, so knocking on the nut with a hammer, soft hammer like a copper hammer, brass didn't work so well. So I'm back to the way you probably should do it, with some sort of a puller. And I mounted it back in the vise. Didn't take much effort to break it free. So this is what comes off of there. the washer. Don't forget to put that washer back in when you reassemble it. And always have to get the old seal out. I'm just going to take a big screwdriver and pop it out of there. There you can see my big screwdriver. Take a little leverage to get that to pop out. What I'm doing, I'm pulling on this thing, giving it some tension, and then I'm smacking it right here with my copper mallet, and it's starting to come up. That's the seal popped free, and it's got a metal outside. You can see down in there, it looks kind of like a washer, but I think it's what they call the oil slinger. So I'm going to put the new seal in, and when the new seal goes in, what I do is I wipe this out, make sure there's no debris in there, and tap the seal in place. And it's supposed to sit no more than about a 30-second below the top of this edge. This is the new seal. It's a Carquest Seal, 35 by 55 by 11 millimeter. I've put in several seals in these pinions, and there's different numbers for them. It's kind of easier to find them when they're called out by their physical dimensions like that. I like to use this Forma gasket, number 2, non-hardening. I usually run my finger around the inside of the here of the metal part, and just put a light coating in there before I put the seal in. I've got this handy aluminum washer. I collect these things at junkyards, or take cars apart, wherever I can get them, because you never know when you're going to need them. It just works just fine for setting on top of that seal and getting it started. And what I did, I just tapped with a small hammer around the edges until I got the seal started. And you want to keep checking it. See how the right side's a little higher? So you want to make sure you keep checking it and tap it down in there even until it's flush or just below the surface. Now I've got the seal installed, and it's pretty close to being flush. Now before I put this back in, I want to make sure I wipe down this metal with some grease, and maybe even put a little grease around the inside of the seal, and I can put this back on. Okay, I've got it back on. I didn't hammer it down real tight, because you can't really, because the bearing's in there. So I got to put the washer, make sure the washer's in there, put the nut on, and I'll start tightening down to get that 9 1/4 turns. So I put my bar back on there and rotated it around till I was about almost 9 1/8 turns. I need 9 1/4, and my notch is almost lined up. So now I'm going to take the torque wrench, set it for about 64 pounds, and tighten it. So you can see I got my torque wrench. I held that bar while I pulled the torque wrench, and I stopped at 68 pounds, which lines up the notch almost perfect. Now, the final thing would be to check the preload, of course, before I tighten up that nut. And it turns out it's just a little over 2 pounds, just a hair more than it was. And I'm not going to try to get it any higher than that. 3 to 9 is what they recommend in the book, but this is what it was before, so if it isn't broke, don't fix it. That's what I'm going with. So to finish up, all you have to do is knock that back into the notch so the nut can't come loose, and I think that one's good to go. And there you have the final product. If you want to continue watching, I'm going to show how to make this, and the dimensions will be at the end. This is a tool I made. It's got a long handle on it. One of the uses is for getting this is the front axle. There's a nut here. Imagine a nut in the shaft. What this does, you imagine this is the ground. Your car's jacked up. This wedges against the ground. And then you can take your torque wrench, put it on that nut, and tighten it down. If you're going to be loosening it, you just switch it around to the other side. Of course, you'd want to put one of the lug, maybe 2 lug nuts on here. Okay, here's the rear differential. And you can see I put some bolts in there. Now I can, after I knock this notch out, I can get this nut off and also put it back on using that combined with my torque wrench. And last but not least, imagine this is your pulley on, well, this is the pulley off of the front of the crankshaft, and there's a bolt, 19mm bolt here, and in order to get that off, you got 2 bolts, and I would use those existing holes, bolt that on, and then imagine this hitting up against the frame of the car. So if I'm loosening this, I'm going to be turning my wrench this way, just putting tension on this, and the distance from here out to here needs to be about 18 inches minimum in order for that to work. So here's what I was just talking about with the front crankshaft pulley. You assume you have the radiator off and everything, but when that bar is bolted to the pulley, and it goes over here, and there's the frame right down here next to those tubings, and it'll come up under that frame, and that'll be what stops the bar from moving, so you can remove the bolt on the end of the crank. This is how my tool is made. These 2 holes are elongated, oval shape, so they'll handle both the front pulley and the rear differential. I put these 2 here, only match the differential, and these are elongated. But anyway, see how it's bolted to a 2-inch by 1/2 inch thick bar. It's about 24 inches long. This is the actual plan, which I'll also post on here for making that thing. You have the option of elongating the holes or putting all the holes in it like I show here. I'm going to show the bolt patterns here. So basically it's a 4x8 piece of 1/4 inch flat bar. 3/16 would work. And then I notched out here and here, put a couple bolts in it so I could bolt it to this bar, and then drilled the holes. Comes in pretty handy.